Hello, in today's video I wanted to talk about how you actually go about getting a job in 3D modeling, primarily from a visual effects perspective, not so much for games, though we'll probably touch on it, mainly just because I don't have as much experience in that. So getting a job in 3D can be difficult, it can be daunting, and especially if you have zero experience, and I know exactly what that's like. For example, I studied computer animation and visual effects at university between 2015 and 2018, so I've been there kind of worrying about, how am I going to make a portfolio that's good enough? Am I good enough to even be in this? And the humongous amount of imposter syndrome that you go through, and I know what the highs and lows of that journey are like. So I do know exactly how you feel, but I also know how to make that easier on yourself and give you a better chance of actually getting a job. Especially these days, it might seem even more challenging to get into the VFX industry as a 3D modeler, but it is still possible and you absolutely can do it. That's something that you need to remind yourself of. Regardless of where you are on that journey, maybe you have a lot more to learn, maybe you don't, maybe you're a bit more ready to get into the industry. You can do it, but you just need to put in the work, and hopefully some of these tips that helped me will help you, and I'll go through them and explain why they helped as well, more importantly. So if you're in a bit of a hurry and you don't want to listen to me explain all the points that could potentially help you, though I'd encourage you to listen to them, I'll do a quick run through of all the main things that I think are really, really important if you're trying to get into the visual effects industry as a 3D modeler, but also for games as well, and just generally getting a job in 3D. So the most important thing is going to be your showreel or portfolio. That's the main important thing. Second best thing you can do is to make sure that your absolute best work is in that portfolio. It's more important than your CV, your cover letter, everything. It is the thing that gets you a job, okay? Secondly, and maybe somewhat controversially, I'd say it's better to be more of a generalist than be hyper-focused on one thing, and I'll get more into why that is later on. Thirdly, people skills are actually really, really important. I'm not saying you need to be the most outgoing social butterfly in the whole world, but it is good to talk to people and it will definitely help you in your career. The 3D industries and design industries in general are quite small relatively to others, and a lot of people know each other. So, a bit of goodwill and kindness can go a really long way. And third is just to I can't count. Lastly, don't ever stop learning. Don't rest on your laurels. There's always going to be new skills to learn, and it will just make you a better artist and a better person to work with in general. So with that out of the way, I want to talk a little bit more about your showreel or portfolio. So it's, like I said, probably the most important thing when you're trying to get a job as a 3D modeler, regardless of the industry, okay? Your reel is even more important than your CV is. That's really just your experience. And I've written down a list of things here which are really, really going to make this, make your showreel stand out amongst like all the other applicants. And this is mainly coming from a VFX perspective, just because that's what my background is. Though I do think some of this can be applied in general as well. The first thing is have good topology, okay? And I think that probably goes without saying. Unless you're doing something like, purely concept art, then the topology isn't as important, but it still is important. But for the most part, that's probably not the case. So topology is incredibly important, and you should make sure that that is something that you show off. And it's nice and clean, and you've not got triangles everywhere. Even for hard surface models, it's not always necessary to have clean, even quads, and I've made a video about that in the past, but just good, clean topology that works is really, really important. And like I said, show off your topology, don't present a subdivided model. I've seen a lot of student reels do this, where they pre-subdivide their model because they think it has to be really, really smooth. And when you go and look at the show reel, it just looks like this kind of big mess, and you can't really see what's going on because the quads are so tiny. Not only is it hard to see, it can also kind of hide problems. And it's just not how you work in a VFX studio either, If you're working on a hard surface model, for example, like a car or train or gun or something like that, you're not going to pre-subdivide it. It's going to get subdivided at render time, so you want to make sure that you're working to the same spec, right? That's another point as well. Work in the same way that they do in the studios, or as much as you can to your knowledge. But really, for the topology, that's really, really important. Another thing would be to model something real, so that you show that you can, right? When you work in visual effects, modeling a lot of the time you're going to be creating things that are real, whether that's from a scan or from reference. You know, of course, you're going to work on fantastical things like spaceships as well, or other kind of sci-fi or fantasy things. But a lot of what you do is actually just modeling real things, because there's VFX and everything, right? Like the James Bond movies, for example. I worked on James Bond No Time to Die when I was at ILM. And for a lot of that project, I was just modeling guns and cars. You'd be surprised how many of those are CG in the background, but you don't notice it because we model them really, really accurately using scans and reference images. So showing that you can do that will go a long way to greatly improving your reel. Next, I would say lighting is actually important in your showreel and portfolio. And you might think, oh, why does that matter? I'm going to go in and be a 3D modeler. I don't need to know how to light anything. Well, no, that's not entirely true, because you're still presenting your work and you want to be able to present it as well as possible. And what's one of the best ways to do that? Well, of course, having a good model to begin with, right? That's the most important thing. But lighting it well as well is also really important, not only because it presents your model nicely, okay, but also it shows that you have that artistic capability as well. You can think beyond just the technical aspects of a good model, because at the end of the day, you're not there just to be this sort of like super techie, you know, it's not like computer-aided design. You're not designing and parts that are going to be machined or manufactured. It is an art form and it is an artistic job, and you are an artist. And they do, you know, as much as you are modeling real objects, they do require you to be quite an artistic person too. Not only that as well, it just shows that you have a good understanding of like more things in the pipeline, which is always nice as well. And I think it will just give whoever is looking at your showreel more confidence in you as an artist, and you look more kind of multifaceted in that way. The next thing would be to limit the amount of things you have in your showreel. I've seen a lot of student reels have like 8+ things, which is just way, way, way too many. You know, this applies to so many things in life, but it certainly does in showreels and portfolios, and that really is quality over quantity. Okay, your best piece, as in the absolute most amazing best thing you've ever made, that should be the very first thing in your showreel, because that's the first thing your recruiters and oftentimes the supervisors that you're going to be working with will see when they're looking over your reel or portfolio and deciding whether or not to even bring you in for interview. So it's so important that you really, really nail down, I would say at most 3 or 4 things at the most. Okay, it really is quality over quantity, and make sure that is your absolute best work. And if you're not happy with any of your work, make more things. As tough as that sounds, you really want to make sure that your best work is in there, and if it's not up to scratch, just don't put it in, okay? Because it's just going to hamper your chances. Another point as well is music. I see a lot of people get caught up on this. I know I did when I made my first reel. I had to find the perfect music, and I was like, oh, should I edit my show reel to the music? No, you can do that, and I have seen it where it works really well, but realistically it's not that important. The main thing is just your work, you know, and it's not like a situation where the lighting helps your models. They're not bothered whether or not you can mix a soundtrack when you're putting your reel together. You know, if that's something you want to do, go for it, but I would say that you're better off, if you're not sure, just picking a track that kind of works, that fits nicely, isn't offensive. Make sure it doesn't say a bunch of swear words in it, right? That goes without saying. And it's kind of just pleasant to listen to, isn't over the top. The reality is most hiring managers and recruiters and supervisors that preview your reel, they're just going to mute it. I have heard from people that they do actually like the music on occasion, but bear in mind that's just one person that's ever told me this. Most of the time they just mute the reel. Okay, so I wouldn't worry about it that much. Another thing as well, and this kind of goes back to showing real objects, is that it's a really good idea to show breakdowns. And if you're not sure what a breakdown is, that's essentially just showing your work like you would at school, right? If you ever did an exam and they said, oh, explain how you got to this calculation, it's basically the same thing. So for example, just having a cut where you show the topology of your object. If you're doing a 360 turntable, which a lot of people will do for their objects, have a few seconds where the topology comes in so that the hiring manager can see that as well and make sure that your work is good. If you modeled something in real life, have some of the reference come up as well. A great thing to do, let's say if you modeled something from a museum, is to overlay the reference on top of your model, and then, you know, if you've done a really good job, the model and reference is going to line up 1-to-1, and that will look even better. If you are going to do textures, that's something you can show as well, and you can break that down. You can show the diffuse and your, you know, specular maps and normal maps and so on. And that kind of leads me into my next point is, if you're not particularly good at texturing, I'd say actually don't bother texturing your models at all, because it can actually make them look worse. And that sounds really horrible, but it's some advice that I was given a long time ago when I first started applying by people in the industry at the time. And they said, yeah, you're better off just not texturing your model if you're not good at texturing, or if that's not something you want to do, because it's potentially going to actually make your models look worse, even if they are really, really good. So you're much better off just going for like a gray scale kind of material, or at least a solid color material with a bit of shine to it, so you can see the specular when the model spins around, that kind of thing. One last point on the amount that you put into a reel and time as well is I would try to keep your show reel under a minute. Any longer than that and it just gets a bit excessive. You might see some really experienced senior artists have really long show reels, but what you got to remember is in those, it's probably just like shot after shot after shot of work they've done in actual feature film and television in studios. So they're kind of just, they could put whatever in there, it doesn't really matter. The hiring manager is going to see their credentials and go, oh yeah, I know what they're doing. So when you're first getting into VFX, obviously it's only going to be your own work, maybe some like team-based work as well that you've done in groups. So it's a bit different at that stage. You really just want to show your best work possible. But yeah, that's really just the main pointers on the portfolio and showreel, and that, you know, is the most important part. The next topic I wanted to cover, and I don't really see too many people mentioning it these days, is it's better to be more of a generalist than it is to be hyper-focused and specialized on one thing, which sounds maybe slightly silly considering this is a video about becoming a 3D modeler. But I'll explain why. So these days, and it's always been this case, I think, to some degree, it's better to have more skills as opposed to just one. And by that, I don't mean that you should know every single element of the pipeline, right? You don't have to be an animator, a rigger, a lighter, a rendering artist, a texture artist, and a 3D modeler, okay? There are people that do that kind of thing, and they do generally have generalist departments. They did have one at ILM in the digital model shop when I was there. I'm pretty sure they still do, and I think a lot of studios might have that too, just because it's good to have a bunch of generalists around when you need general things completed, and they can help with things as well. But it also makes you way more employable, and it's easier to keep you there once you're there, right? Can you imagine if you come in and you're just a specialist at hard surface, okay? And then maybe the studio doesn't have so many shows coming up where they need a bunch of hard surface artists. Well, the person they're going to keep around is the modeler that can also do creature modeling, because maybe that's all they've got coming up in the pipeline. Right, and that sounds harsh, but at the end of the day, these are kind of just businesses. And, you know, I wish it wasn't like this and everyone could stay on, but it is just the nature of it, you know. And the best thing you can do for yourself is be more of a generalist and have these skills. And if you want to get into 3D modeling specifically, that could just be something like, well, I can do hard surface and I can also do creature, or vice versa, right? You can make cars and dinosaurs. Having good texturing skills is also really handy. You know, you could be good at hard surface and texturing, or just creature modeling and texturing. Studios do still hire specifically for hard surface and creature modelers, but with that being said, it's still better to be able to do both, just because it's going to make you more employable, it's going to give you more job prospects, and it's going to mean that you can stick it out at a company for way longer than someone that might be hyper specialized. With that being said, though, this might sound kind of contrary to what I've been talking about. You can be a specialist, but if you're going to go that route, you want to make sure you are the absolute bloody best at that thing, okay? Because it's going to be a hell of a lot harder, right, to actually get a job with those skills. So that is kind of the level that you need to be at. You would just need to be an insanely talented, an insanely well-practiced hard surface artist if you're going to get in just on that, or just creature, or just texture, and so on, right? I think you can get away with being just a texture artist more than you can just be a hard surface modeler, because all models need texturing. So, you know, if you want to just go one specific route with 3D modeling, I would say at least be good at either hard surface and creature, or be good at one of those two and texturing. Maybe even more being just good at one of those two and texturing, because that's just going to make it, you know, your showreel is going to look more impressive. You can get a job easier, and you'll stick around at a studio for much longer than someone that doesn't have those skills. It's also just a lot more fun, I think, as well, and you're going to have a much better time in a studio when you understand different parts of the pipeline. You know, if you're really good at texturing, and of course because of that you'll know a lot about UV unwrapping, If you know a lot about that while you're working as a 3D modeler, you'll kind of be able to predict the requirements of the texture department. You'll know what they're talking about when they're listing their requirements, and it will grease the wheels, so to speak. You'll be a better part of that team, having more skills to you. Okay, the next part I wanted to talk about doesn't actually have anything to do with 3D modeling or texturing or anything like technical skills. It's more about just being a good person, right? And that kind of goes without saying, right? But you'd be surprised. It's the VFX industry and 3D industries, whether that's games or architecture or like computer-aided design and all of that, they're much smaller industries than you might expect. And a lot of people know each other. People tend to move around, especially in VFX. You know, some people might work at a studio in Montreal in Canada for a few years, and then they'll come to London, then maybe they'll go to New Zealand. Your name can get around very, very quickly. And if you're a bit of a dickhead, that people will find out. And way more so than in any other industry, right? When I was at university, one of the main things my lecturer told me at the time is don't be a dick. And right, it goes without saying, it might sound a bit harsh, and 99.9% of the people aren't, right? They're lovely. But it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking for a job in this industry, is that just try to be a nice person. It goes without saying in life as well, right? With that being said, it doesn't mean that you need to be like the most sociable person in the room. I'm definitely not. I'm quite an introverted guy. And you don't need to go to all the parties, but I think just generally be approachable. Normal things, right? You don't have to be like a huge social butterfly. But just be kind and willing to help and chat from time to time as well. I think another thing as well is always be willing to learn, especially when you're new in those environments. You're going to be getting a lot of feedback, and it's not personal to you, right? It's mainly just trying to make you a better artist. And I think being able to take that and not take it personally, and just, you know, see that this is for the needs of the whatever project you're working on, it will just make you a better artist. And being able to take feedback well from your peers and supervisors is just going to make you a million times better. You're going to be easier to work with, and it just generally makes you a better person as well, if you can take on feedback and improve your skills. Be helpful as well, always be willing to lend a hand, and I think form connections with people as well. I know that can be difficult. It's really difficult for me, especially when I first started. I was only 19, 20, you know, I was a really, really nervous guy, and I hadn't had this was like my proper big job when I first started in 2018. So I know what that's like when you don't necessarily want to be talking to people all the time, but it's one of those things where it really can help you. It's quite a social industry. I think the thing, it's not what you know, it's who you know, is not entirely true in the VFX industry and 3D industries, because, you know, if your work sucks, you're probably not going to get hired no matter how friendly of a guy you are, right? Guy or girl, how you are. But, you know, it still goes a long way in getting you future prospects and future jobs if you're a nice person and people know you to be a nice person. And coming towards the end of the video, we now need to talk about the elephant in the room, which I'm sure a lot of people were thinking about, is, will AI take my job? Okay, first off, the short answer is absolutely not. So don't worry, but why is it the case that it's not going to take your job? So the truth is, and something a lot of people don't like to admit, is that AI actually can be useful in specific situations. Now, I'm not exactly the type of guy to praise AI 24/7. Personally, I think it's done a lot more harm than it has good, unfortunately. I think its current use is not particularly good, and if anything, it's kind of, you know, not to mention all the water that's being used to cool the data centers despite record drought levels. Anyway, we won't get into it. But the truth is, it is used in design these days to some degree, but largely just in early concepting stages, and especially not in 3D. There are some things you might have seen, like Gaussian splatting and things like that, where you can create basically what is, you know, not exactly the same, but is similar to photogrammetry. But is it in any way actually going to take over the role of a 3D artist? No, absolutely not. And the big heads at the top of studios are not willing to start using it for this, because people, they know that by and large, the majority of the population don't like to see it, right? There was a few cases where there were some marketing gimmicks where I think Coca-Cola did an AI ad or something, and they just look horrendous. They're not good. They're just marketing stunts. No one liked them. And then since then, have they done it again? No. Okay, so it's more of a fad. AI is here to stay, and it probably will continue to develop. Despite that, it's still not going to take over your job, I assure you. All of the big studios probably have some use out of it in some cases, but the serious professional design is quite limited outside of a few marketing stunts. Anyone doing big design in a professional studio, they don't care. So don't pay attention to whatever guy is saying on LinkedIn about how AI is going to take over the world. Relax. Your skills are still far more valuable than any AI can be. You can't go into ChatGPT and just put make Avengers 25 please. It's not going to work. So that's just been some tips that I've picked up throughout my time in the industry and outside of it as well, but still while working in 3D, from my journey into getting to be a hard surface model in visual effects as well. A lot of this is stuff that I've learned as I've gone on, and also just from other people. So I hope this has been helpful. If you're feeling kind of down in the dumps and you're not feeling confident enough to apply, I think a lot of the time that comes from inside. I think artists sometimes are their own worst enemy, and we put ourselves down all the time. But I think the truth is you're probably better than you think you are. And you know, some people out there might need more work than others, but that's okay. Everyone's at a different point in their journey. No one gets from A to B at the same time, right? Some people might go to A to C, back to B again, and then finally to where they need to go. And that's okay. You know, everyone's journey is different, but just work hard. You know, remember why you're doing this. And if it's something you really, really want to do, don't lose sight of it. Okay. It's okay. It's going to be difficult, but if you want to make it work, you'll stick with it. And hopefully some of these tips have helped you. And if you follow these, you'll probably have an easier time getting in. If you have any other questions, please do let me know. I'm always happy to answer those. Best of luck with whatever it is you're doing, whether you're a student or a hobbyist and you're trying to get into a professional 3D role. Let me know how it goes as well. I always love to hear about success stories. And yeah, again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.